I'm Maya Molson, 29, and I was a U.S. Air Force combat pilot until one mission ended everything and I walked away from the cockpit. For years, I chased one thing: my father's approval, pushing myself through training, deployments, and war just to prove I belonged. But when he grabbed my arm on that flight and told me, "Let the men handle it," right as a hijacking unfolded, I made a decision that changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up when someone tried to put you in your place. I grew up on Air Force bases, not the pretty parts, not the officer housing with the trimmed hedges and the welcome baskets, the flight line, the tarmac, the places where the noise was so loud your chest vibrated and your teeth hurt and you couldn't hear yourself think. That's where I learned what mattered. I was born at Eglin Air Force Base in the Florida Panhandle. My father, Thomas Molson, was a captain in the United States Air Force, pay grade 03. He flew F-15. He was good at it. He was good at most things that didn't require talking to a 6-year-old about her feelings. The first memory I have that means anything is from 1999. I was 5 years old. My mother, Laura, held my hand at the chain-link fence along the flight line while my father taxied an F-15 toward the runway. The jet was enormous. The sound of it made my whole body hum. But that's not what I remember most. What I remember is the way he looked when he climbed out of the cockpit afterward. Helmet under his arm, flight suit dark with sweat. Walking like a man who had just done the only thing in the world worth doing. My dad never looked happy, but he looked something close to it when he stepped off that jet. I wanted to know what that felt like. My mother understood that. She was 32 then, brown-haired, quiet, the kind of woman who could read a room without saying a word. She squeezed my hand and said, "He loves that plane more than anything." She wasn't bitter about it. She was just honest. Laura Molson was always honest. 1 year later, she was dead. It was the year 2000. I was 6. My father had just been promoted to Major 04. My mother was driving back to base housing on a Tuesday afternoon when a fuel truck ran a stop sign at the intersection near the commissary. She died on impact. They told me later that she didn't suffer. I was 6. I didn't know what suffer meant in that context. I just knew she wasn't coming home. The funeral was at the base chapel. My father wore his dress blues. He didn't cry, not at the service, not at the reception, not that night when he put me to bed without reading a story. He folded her flag into a triangle and put it in his closet. He didn't put out a photo. That's when I learned that in our family, you just keep going. You pack the grief into a box and you put it somewhere no one can see it and you report for duty the next morning. That was the Molson way. I was 6 years old and I already knew the rules. After that, it was just us. He didn't remarry, he didn't date, as far as I ever knew. He worked, he flew, he got promoted. And I grew up in the long shadow of a man who expressed love through proximity and discipline and silence. In 2006, we moved to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. I was 12, he'd made Lieutenant Colonel, 05. New base, new school, same dynamic. I built model aircraft in my room, F-16s, F-15s. A B-2 Spirit I'd ordered from a catalog with birthday money. I had 11 of them lined up on my shelf by the time he noticed. He came home late one night, still in his flight suit, and stopped in my doorway. He looked at the models. He looked at me. "Those are nice," he said. "You know, the real ones are a lot harder than balsa wood." He said it casually, almost gently. But I heard what was underneath it, the same thing I'd hear for the next 17 years. "This isn't for you." I didn't stop building. I built 3 more that month. By 2010, he was a full colonel, 06. I was 16. I'd stopped trying to earn his praise and started trying to earn his respect, which was harder and less rewarding and somehow more addictive. I ran track. I kept a 4.0 GPA. I joined Civil Air Patrol and logged orientation flights in Cessna 172s before I had a driver's license. He never came to a single meet or ceremony. He sent a text once that said, "Good job," after I made varsity. I screenshot it. I still have it. In 2012, I was 18. I earned a full ROTC scholarship to the University of Colorado. I called my father to tell him. There was a long pause on the line, the kind of pause that in a normal family might have been pride swelling up. In our family, it was him choosing his words carefully. He asked if I'd considered intelligence or logistics instead. I told him I was going pilot track. Another pause. He said, "Okay." He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say good luck. He said, "Okay." And I told myself it was enough. It wasn't. What followed was the fastest and most defining stretch of my life, and I'll move through it the way it felt, compressed, relentless, no time to breathe. 2016, I graduated, commissioned as a second lieutenant, 01. I reported to Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas for undergraduate pilot training. 2017, I earned my wings. I was promoted to first lieutenant, 02. They assigned me to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina to fly F-16. At a squadron event that year, Colonel Ray Hadley, my father's old wingman, retired 06, age 56, introduced me to the room as Tom Molson's daughter. She got in on the new program. He smiled when he said it. I smiled back. I wanted to break the glass in my hand. 2019, I made captain, 03. I was 25. That same year, my father retired after, roughly, 35 years of service. At his retirement dinner, he thanked 14 people by name. I counted. I wasn't one of them. I deployed to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar 3 months later. Then came 2020, Eastern Syria, a close air support mission. I was 26 years old, a captain flying combat sorties, and I received coordinates for a strike in support of a Marine ground element. The coordinates were confirmed through the Joint Terminal Attack Controller on the ground, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, age 27, a Marine E5. I executed the strike. The coordinates were wrong. 2 Marines died. Lance Corporal Diego Fuentes, age 21, E3. Corporal Aaliyah Briggs, age 23, E4. The investigation took 4 months. I was exonerated. The error was traced to a communication relay failure, not pilot judgment. It didn't matter. 2 people were dead, and I was the one who'd pulled the trigger. I called my father from Al Udeid the night I was cleared. I don't know what I expected him to say. Something like, "It wasn't your fault." Something like, "I'm proud of how you handled it." Something a father might say to his daughter after the worst day of her life. What he said was, "I'm sorry that happened, but this is why I never wanted you in that seat. Some jobs aren't for everyone." I didn't quit because of the mission. I quit because the one person I needed to say, "It wasn't your fault," told me it was. And I believed him. In 2021, I was 27. I separated from the Air Force with an honorable discharge at the rank of Captain, 03. I signed my DD-214. My captain's bars sat on the desk beside the form. I didn't look at them. I moved to Denver. I took a desk job at an aviation safety consulting firm. I read accident reports. I stopped flying. I stopped talking to my father. And for 2 years, I told myself I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I was functioning. And in the Molson family, that was the same thing. 2 years after leaving the Air Force, I was grounded in every sense of the word. I worked at Westfield Aviation Consulting in downtown Denver. I had a corner desk with no window. I read about other pilots' worst days for a living: loss of control, mechanical failure, spatial disorientation, controlled flight into terrain. 8 hours a day, I analyzed the wreckage of other people's mistakes. It was the only kind of flying I could stand. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment near Sloan Lake. I ran every morning before dawn. I didn't go near airports. I didn't look up when planes passed overhead. I had built a life that was small and controlled and completely absent of altitude. And I was 28 years old and already retired from the only thing I'd ever been good at. My best friend from the service, Dara Okonkwo, wouldn't let me disappear entirely. Dara was a major now, 04, age 34, still active duty, stationed at Joint Base Langley Eustis. She'd been my flight instructor during UPT. She was the one who'd told me, on my first solo, "You're not your father's daughter up here. You're a pilot. Act like one." She was also the only person who called me on my nonsense. She video called me on a Saturday in the fall of 2022. I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants, reading an accident brief about a cargo jet that had stalled on approach in Memphis. Dara's face filled the screen, Sharp eyes, box braids pulled back, a look that told me she wasn't calling to chat. "When's the last time you flew?" she asked. "I don't fly." "When's the last time you wanted to?" I didn't answer. She leaned closer to the camera. "Maya, you didn't quit because you lost your nerve. You quit because you lost the one audience you were performing for, and he wasn't even a good judge." I told her she sounded like a therapist. She told me I needed one. We both laughed, but only one of us meant it. Then in late 2022, my father sent me an email. Subject line, DC trip. No greeting, no small talk, no acknowledgement of the nearly 3 years of silence between us. Just logistics. He was being given a service award at a veterans gala in Washington. He wanted me to come. The email read like a briefing, date, time, hotel details, dress code. "No, I miss you. No, I'm sorry. Just operational information." That was always his love language, operational. And I still showed up for it. I read that email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and went for a run. When I came back, I sat down and typed 2 words. "I'll be there." March of 2023. I was 29. My father was 61. I met him at Gate B42 at Denver International Airport. It was the first time we'd been face to face since his retirement dinner in 2019, the one where he'd thanked 14 people by name and I wasn't one of them. He was wearing a navy blazer with a flag pin on the lapel. I was in jeans and a leather jacket. He looked older. His hair had gone fully gray. He stood when he saw me, and for a half second I thought he might hug me. He didn't. He said, "They're boarding group 2. 3 years of silence, and the first thing he said was a gate announcement. Like we'd seen each other yesterday. Like nothing had happened. I noticed other passengers at the gate without really noticing them. A well-dressed man in his mid-50s, I'd later learn his name was Congressman Daniel Aldrich, age 54, sat reading a newspaper with a young woman beside him, his legislative aide, Claire Huang, age 31, and scattered through the terminal, 3 people who didn't appear to know each other. A broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair and cold eyes, Victor Lenko, 38, a younger man in a gray hoodie sitting near the window, Darren Cole, 33, and a woman with dark hair and a black jacket near the jetway, Nina Sorrell, 30. They weren't together. They weren't speaking. But something about the way they moved, or didn't move, registered somewhere in the back of my mind. An old instinct, one I thought I'd buried. We boarded. My father and I sat side by side in economy. I had the window. He had the aisle. We'd exchanged maybe 40 words since the gate. He mentioned that Ray Hadley would be at the gala. I stiffened. Hadley was the man who'd introduced me as Tom Molson's daughter. She got in on the new program. He was also the man who'd called me emotional when I'd confronted my father after Syria. My father didn't notice my reaction, or didn't care. He pulled out a crossword puzzle and uncapped a pen. "Ray says hello, by the way," he said, not looking up. "He's looking forward to seeing you." He said it like it was a gift. Like Ray Hadley's approval was something I should want. I looked out the window and counted to 10. Somewhere around minute 12, I noticed the man from the gate, Lenko, row 8, glance back toward the rear of the cabin. Then again, 2 minutes later, the same direction, the same controlled turn. Not rubbernecking, scanning. It was the kind of movement I'd been trained to recognize and then trained to ignore in civilian life. I didn't say anything. I didn't even fully register it as a threat. It was just a flicker, an old reflex firing in a muscle I hadn't used in 2 years. I stared out the aircraft window. My reflection floated over the clouds, translucent, barely there, a ghost of someone who used to fly above them instead of beneath them. In the aisle behind me, Victor Lenko checked his watch. The seatbelt sign was off. 90 minutes into the flight, 3 passengers stood up at the same time. It wasn't simultaneous the way it happens in movies, synchronized, theatrical. It was staggered by about 4 seconds, which made it worse because by the time your brain registered that the first man was standing, the second was already moving, and the third had locked down the rear of the cabin before anyone could process what was happening. Victor Lenko stood from row 8. He reached into the seat back pocket in front of him and pulled out a blade. Ceramic, matte white, invisible to metal detectors. He held it low, close to his body, and said in accented English, "Everyone stays seated. No one gets hurt." His voice was flat, practiced. There was no anger in it, no desperation. He sounded like a man reading a checklist. Darren Cole moved from the rear of the aircraft and went straight for the cockpit. The door was unlocked. It had been opened moments earlier by a flight attendant delivering coffee to the crew. Cole slipped through. I heard a shout, a dull impact, then silence. Nina Sorrell blocked the rear galley exit. She pulled a blade of her own and pressed flight attendant Rachel Dunn, 29, same age as me, against the galley wall with one hand. Rachel didn't scream. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. A woman in row 12 screamed instead. A man 3 rows ahead of me stood up, and Lenko crossed the distance in 2 strides and put the blade against his throat. The man sat back down. The cabin went quiet, not calm, just frozen. 143 people holding their breath at the same time. I'd heard that sound before, the sound of people trying not to exist. 3 of them, coordinated, no hesitation. These weren't desperate men. They were professionals, and the whole cabin knew it. I looked at my father. His jaw was tight. His hand was on the armrest, knuckles white. He was staring straight ahead, calculating, the way he used to look when he received a briefing with bad variables. He didn't look at me. Congressman Aldrich had gone pale 2 rows ahead. Claire Huang had her hand on his arm, gripping it hard enough to leave marks. The overhead bins hummed. The engines hummed. Everything hummed, except the people. Then the cockpit door swung partially open and Cole shoved someone out. It was the first officer, Beth Morales, 47. She stumbled into the forward cabin, hands raised. There was blood on her uniform shirt, but it wasn't hers. Behind her, through the open door, I could see Captain Frank Herrera slumped sideways in the left seat, bleeding from his forehead, unconscious. Morales was shaking, but composed. She looked at the cabin. She looked at Lenko, who gave her a small nod. Then she reached for the PA handset and keyed it. "If anyone on board has flight experience, we need you in the cockpit." Her voice cracked on the last word. She swallowed. "We need a pilot, right now. If anyone has any flight experience, please." The cabin stayed silent. No one moved. A man in a business suit looked at his hands. A woman clutched her teenage son. An elderly couple held each other. Everyone waited for someone else to be brave. I shifted in my seat. I started to rise, and my father's hand came down on my arm. Hard, not a touch, a grip. The kind of grip he used to use when I was a kid, reaching for something I wasn't supposed to touch. He leaned in close. His voice was low, almost hissed, the way he used to give orders at the dinner table when company was over, and he needed me to behave without making a scene. "Stay in your seat," he said. "Let the men handle this. You'll only make it worse." I looked down at his hand on my arm. I looked at the cabin, every face frozen, watching us. I looked at the cockpit door, still half open, the captain's body visible in the left seat. I looked back at my father. He told me to stay seated, the same way he'd been telling me my whole life. And for the first time, I didn't hear a father. I heard a man who was wrong. I pulled my arm free. I stood. The entire cabin turned. Every pair of eyes in every row found me. A woman in jeans and a leather jacket standing in the aisle of a hijacked airplane. Lenko watched from row 8, the blade resting against his thigh. He looked amused. He saw what everyone else saw. A nervous civilian, not a threat. My father stared up at me from his seat, jaw locked, hand still extended from where I'd pulled free. He wasn't worried about me. He was embarrassed. His daughter, making a scene. That was all he ever saw. He had no idea what I was about to do. I stepped into the aisle. I walked forward, past the rows of terrified passengers, past the woman clutching her son, past Aldrich's pale face and Huang's white knuckles. I didn't look back. I could feel my father's eyes on my back like a targeting laser. I let them burn. I reached the cockpit door. Cole was sitting in the right seat, a blade on his knee, the instruments glowing in front of him. He looked at me. I made my eyes wide. I let my voice shake, not entirely acting. "I took some lessons," I said. "Cessnas, mostly. I can try." He looked me up and down. He saw what my father saw, a woman out of her depth. He waved me in. I sat down in the left seat. I strapped in. Captain Herrera was slumped against the side panel to my left, breathing shallow, a gash across his forehead still seeping. The instrument panel spread out in front of me like a language I hadn't spoken in 2 years. And it came back, all of it. Every gauge, every reading, every muscle memory I thought I'd killed. The game had begun. I looked past Cole's shoulder, down the narrow aisle to where my father sat. His hand, the one that had grabbed me, the one I'd pulled free from, was hanging empty over the armrest. I turned back to the instruments. I had work to do. The cockpit of a Boeing 737 is not an F-16. The systems are different, the feel is different, the scale is different. But the principles are the same: airspeed, altitude, attitude, heading. Physics doesn't care what airframe you're in. And I had spent 4 years learning physics at 400 knots in a single-seat fighter. This was slower, bigger. But the language was the same. Cole sat in the right seat with a ceramic blade on his knee and the confidence of a man who believed he was the most dangerous person in the room. He told me to change heading to 180, due south. I nodded, wide-eyed, playing the part. "Is this the heading thing?" I asked, pointing at the wrong display. "I'm sorry, I've only done this in small planes. Which one is the autopilot?" He leaned over and pointed. While his eyes followed his own finger, my left hand found the transponder panel. I dialed it to 7500. Squawk 7500. The international hijack code. Every radar facility tracking this aircraft would see it instantly. They'd know. Then I entered the heading he'd asked for, but not the one he wanted. I programmed a wide, lazy arc that would take us in a slow circle, rather than toward whatever target they'd planned. From the instruments, it would look like we were turning south. From the ground, ATC would see us going nowhere, buying time. Then I keyed the radio. Not to transmit, I left the microphone hot. Open channel. Everything said in this cockpit was now being heard by every controller monitoring our frequency. Cole didn't notice. He was watching the horizon through the windscreen, not the comm panel. He had no reason to watch me closely. He saw exactly what my father saw: a woman who didn't belong in that seat. I've never been more grateful to be underestimated. I asked Cole 6 stupid questions in 4 minutes. Which gauge is airspeed? How do you read altitude on this thing? Is that the artificial horizon or the turn coordinator? Each question was designed to sound helpless. Each one bought me time. Each one made him trust me less and watch me less. By minute 5, he'd stopped looking at my hands. I was counting silently. 3 hijackers, ceramic blades, no firearms visible. Cole was in the cockpit. He was the immediate problem. Linko was in the cabin with the passengers, the leader, the most dangerous. Sorel was at the rear, controlling the back half. If I could neutralize Cole first, I could move through the forward galley before Lenko and Sorel had time to coordinate a response. I needed a weapon. My eyes swept the cockpit. Behind the left seat, mounted to the bulkhead, was a fire extinguisher. Halen, about 8 pounds, a hard metal cylinder with a solid base. Not designed as a weapon, but I'd trained in close-quarters combat for 3 years. Anything is a weapon if you understand leverage and timing. I glanced at the empty left seat headset hanging on its hook where a real captain should have been wearing it. I thought about my father's hand on my arm. The grip, the words, "Let the men handle this." I thought about Syria, the last time I'd made a split-second decision in a cockpit. I'd been right that time too, technically. The coordinates were confirmed. The strike was authorized. Everything was by the book, and 2 Marines died anyway. Diego Fuentes, 21. Alia Briggs, 23. I was cleared of wrongdoing. The wrongdoing cleared itself of me much more slowly. Now I was in another cockpit, another impossible situation. Someone was going to get hurt no matter what I chose. The difference was simple. This time doing nothing was worse. The last time I made a call in a cockpit, people died. And I spent 2 years convincing myself I didn't have the right to make another one. But there were 143 people behind me who needed someone to make the call. So I made it. I heard it then. Faint, almost imagined. 2 clicks on the radio. No voice, just 2 quick bursts of static. A TC's way of confirming they were receiving without transmitting back and alerting Cole. They knew. 2 clicks that meant someone on the ground was listening. Fighter jets were being scrambled. Law enforcement was staging at Dulles. The cavalry was coming. But it wouldn't matter if Cole figured out what I'd done to the heading before they arrived. I watched his eyes. He was leaning forward now, studying the navigation display. His brow furrowed. The heading readout didn't match what he expected. We should have been further south by now. The coastline should have been shifting. Something wasn't right, and he was starting to feel it. I was running out of time. My right hand drifted behind my seat. My fingers found the cold metal cylinder of the fire extinguisher. I wrapped my hand around the release bracket. Cole was still leaning forward, frowning at the instruments. He hadn't figured it out yet, but he would. Soon. Cole turned toward me. His eyes had changed. The amusement was gone, replaced by something colder. He opened his mouth to speak. I didn't let him finish. I pulled the fire extinguisher from its mount, aimed the nozzle at his face, and squeezed the handle. A blast of white halon foam hit him in the eyes and mouth. He recoiled, gasping, blade hand swinging blind. I swung the base of the extinguisher across his temple. The impact was dull and immediate. He dropped sideways into the instrument panel and then slid to the floor. The blade clattered under the rudder pedals. 8 seconds. That's how long the first one took. I've been in fights that lasted minutes. This one I measured in heartbeats. I grabbed zip ties from the emergency restraint kit mounted behind the captain's seat. I bound Cole's wrists behind his back and checked his pulse, steady, unconscious. Captain Herrera was still slumped in the left seat, breathing, butt out. I was alone in the cockpit. I could hear noise from the cabin. The blast of the extinguisher had been loud, and the passengers were reacting. Murmurs, a stifled scream, the shuffle of people instinctively pressing back into their seats. I had seconds before Sorel or Lenko realized something had gone wrong behind the cockpit door. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, still a quarter full, and stepped out. Sorel was already in the forward galley. She'd heard the commotion and moved forward from the rear cabin, blade in her right hand, eyes scanning. She expected to hear Cole's voice calling her forward. Instead, she saw me coming through the cockpit door. She was fast, trained. She lunged. I sidestepped and looped the pilot's shoulder harness. I'd pulled it from the jump seat as I passed, around her weapon arm. I yanked hard, using my body weight as leverage, and swung her into the galley cart. The cart crashed against the bulkhead. Trays and cans scattered across the floor. Sorrel's blade dropped. I kicked it under the beverage cart and drove her head into the galley counter. She went limp. Rachel Dunn was pressed against the opposite wall, staring at me. Her eyes were enormous. "Zip tie her wrists," I said. "Behind her back. Stay down." Rachel nodded. Her hands were shaking, but she moved. She was braver than she knew. I turned toward the cabin. The aisle stretched before me, 30 rows of terrified faces, overhead bins, emergency lighting. And coming toward me from mid-cabin, moving fast, was Victor Lenko. He was the biggest of the three, the leader, and he was furious. Whatever composed professionalism he'd maintained during the takeover was gone. His partner was down in the cockpit. His other partner was being zip-tied in the galley, and the nervous woman who could barely find the autopilot had done all of it. He charged. We met in the aisle around row 12. There was no room to maneuver, 20 inches between armrests, passengers shrinking away on both sides. He threw a straight punch that caught me in the ribs. The pain was immediate and deep. Something cracked or came close to it. A second punch split my lip. I tasted blood. He pressed forward, using his size, trying to pin me against the seats. I got low. He swung the blade, a wide lateral slash, aimed at my neck. I ducked under it, felt the air move over my hair, and came up inside his reach. I drove my knee into his thigh, which buckled his stance but didn't drop him. He grabbed my jacket and slammed me into the overhead bin. The plastic cover cracked. A carry-on shifted. My vision whited for a half second. Then I saw it, the emergency station mounted to the bulkhead above row 14. The automated external defibrillator. I reached up, yanked the panel open, and pulled the unit free. It was already charged. These units maintain a standby charge at all times. I flipped the cover, pressed the paddles against both sides of Lenko's neck, and discharged. His body seized. Every muscle locked. He dropped to the aisle floor like a bag of concrete. The blade fell from his hand and skidded under a seat. A passenger, Paul Hendricks, 44, a former Army sergeant, E5, was out of his seat before Lenko hit the ground. He dropped onto Lenko's back and pinned his arms. Another passenger helped hold his legs. Hendricks looked up at me, breathing hard. Where the hell did you learn to fight like that? I wiped blood from my lip with the back of my hand. Air Force. The cabin didn't erupt in cheers. There was no applause. There was a sound I can only describe as a collective exhale. 140 people releasing the breath they'd been holding for the last 20 minutes. Some were crying, some were shaking. A few just stared at the ceiling, eyes blank with the specific emptiness that follows genuine terror. I walked back up the aisle toward the cockpit. My ribs ached. My forearm was bleeding from a gash I didn't remember getting. Sorrel's blade must have caught me in the galley. My lip was swelling. I could feel my pulse in my face. I passed row 14, my father's row. He was staring at me. His face was unreadable, jaw tight, hands gripping both armrests, body rigid. But his eyes were wet. Not crying, not Tom Molson, but wet in a way I'd never seen before. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I walked past him the same way I'd walked past him 20 minutes earlier, when I'd pulled free from his grip and stepped into the aisle. The same direction, the same silence. But everything was different now. I entered the cockpit. I closed the door. I sat down in the left seat. Blood dripped from my forearm onto the yoke. I keyed the radio. This is the cockpit. All three are down. I have the aircraft. A TC responded immediately. The voice on the other end was steady and professional and sounded like the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. My voice was steady. My hands were not. A TC patched me through to a controller named Patterson. No rank, civilian. He had a calm voice, the kind of voice you'd want talking to you if the world was falling apart and you needed to land 70,000 pounds of aluminum and human beings on a strip of concrete you'd never seen before. We've got you on radar, Patterson said. Dulles is cleared. Runway 1 left. Emergency vehicles are staged. You're going to bring this in, and everyone's going to walk off. Just fly the numbers. Fly the numbers. That's what my father used to say. That's what every flight instructor I ever had used to say. And for the first time in 2 years, I listened. The approach into Dulles was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Patterson walked me through the unfamiliar systems, the auto brake settings, the flap schedule, the glide slope indicator. Most of it I already knew. The principles don't change between airframes, airspeed, altitude, descent rate, flare. It's just bigger, heavier. And the last time I'd flown anything, 2 people had died. Captain Herrera stirred beside me. He groaned, tried to lift his head, then slumped back. He was semi-conscious, aware enough to know someone was in his seat, not aware enough to do anything about it. I told him, "Stay still, Captain, I've got it." He didn't respond. I don't know if he heard me. My hands would not stop shaking. I could see them trembling on the yoke, a fine, constant vibration that no amount of willpower could still. I'd felt it before. After the Sirius strike, sitting in the cockpit on the ramp at Al Udeid, hands shaking while the ground crew marshaled me into the parking spot. The shaking wasn't fear. It was everything you can't process in the moment catching up with you all at once. I was too fast on approach. I saw it on the airspeed indicator and knew it before Patterson said anything. I was carrying an extra 15 knots, nervous energy translated into ground speed. I pulled the nose up to bleed it off, overcorrected, felt the aircraft balloon above the glide slope, then pushed the nose back down. The runway filled the windscreen. It was enormous, 10,000 feet of concrete and flashing emergency lights. I'd landed on carrier-length strips and simulators. I'd put an F-16 down on a 6,000-foot runway in a crosswind in Qatar. But this was different. This was 143 people trusting a woman they didn't know to do something she hadn't done in over 2 years. I flared. The main gear hit, hard, too hard. The nose slammed down and the aircraft shuddered. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins. Someone in the cabin screamed. I stood on the brakes. The anti-skid system pulsed under my feet. The aircraft decelerated, vast, then faster, and rolled out down the center line. Emergency vehicles converged from both sides, lights flashing red and white in the gray DC morning. I was on the ground. It wasn't pretty. Any instructor would have failed me, but 143 people were going to walk off that plane, and I was the one who'd put it on the ground. I sat in the left seat and gripped the yoke and didn't let go. I could hear it now, the cabin behind me. Applause. Ragged, uneven, mixed with crying and shouting and the sound of overhead bins being opened and people standing up too fast. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, hands locked on the yoke, blood drying on the control column, staring at the runway lights, blurring through the windscreen. Emergency crews boarded through the forward door. Paramedics, federal air marshals, FBI. They moved Captain Herrera out first, then Cole, who was still unconscious and zip-tied in the footwell. A paramedic tried to look at my arm. I told her I was fine. She gave me the look that paramedics give you when you are clearly not fine, and they don't have time to argue. An FBI agent, badge, dark jacket, no-nonsense expression, asked me to step out of the cockpit. I unstrapped. I stood. My legs almost didn't hold. I walked into the cabin. I have never experienced anything like what happened next. People reached for me, not grabbing, reaching, touching my arm, my shoulder, my hand, saying things I couldn't fully hear. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. A woman was sobbing. A man held his daughter and looked at me and just nodded. Rachel Dunn, the flight attendant, stepped into the aisle and hugged me so hard my bruised ribs screamed. I let her. Paul Hendricks shook my hand and held it for a long time without saying anything. Congressman Aldrich stood in his row and said, I don't know your name, but I owe you my life. Maya, I said, and you don't owe me anything. I was looking for one face. I scanned the cabin as I moved toward the exit, searching the rows, the aisle, the crowd of passengers being organized by emergency personnel. He wasn't there. He'd already deplaned. I walked up the jet bridge. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My boots echoed on the metal floor. Emergency lights flashed through the windows behind me, red and white alternating against the gray sky. He was standing at the end of the jet bridge, not with the other passengers, not being processed by the FBI agents who were staging in the gate area. He was standing alone, hands at his sides, military straight even now. He looked old. He looked shaken. He looked like a man who'd just watched a war from a seat he couldn't get out of. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it. He nodded once, the same curt, clipped nod he used to give after I'd run drills as a kid. A nod that meant acceptable. A nod that never meant good. I walked past him toward the FBI staging area. I didn't stop. Not yet. I wasn't ready. He watched me go. He didn't follow. The FBI field office in D.C. was a windowless room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table that looked like it had absorbed 1,000 bad days. I sat on one side. Special Agent Karen Liu, 39, dark suit, calm eyes, sat on the other. She had a recorder and a legal pad, and the specific posture of someone who was going to be professional no matter what. I gave my statement the way I used to give after-action reports, sequential, clinical, stripped of emotion. I walked through the entire hijacking from takeoff to landing. Lenko's approach, Cole's entry into the cockpit, Sorel's positioning in the rear, the PA call, the transponder, the squawk code, the heading change, the open mic, the fire extinguisher, the harness, the defibrillator. Agent Liu took notes and didn't interrupt. When I finished, she looked up. How did you know to squawk 7500? I'm a combat pilot, I said. She paused, wrote something. Why didn't you identify yourself as military to the hijackers? Because they would have killed me first. She studied me for a moment, then set her pen down. Captain Molson, for the record, you saved 143 people today. I wasn't counting. She let that sit. Then she closed her notepad and told me an airline liaison would take me to a hotel. She gave me her card, she shook my hand, and I walked out into a hallway that was too bright and too quiet. The hotel room was on the 4th floor. Standard government rate, beige carpet, beige walls, a bed that was too soft and a shower that was too hot. I stood under the water for 20 minutes and watched diluted blood swirl down the drain from the gash on my forearm. The paramedic at Dulles had butterflied it. It would probably scar. I didn't care. I hadn't slept. The news was running the story. Hijacking attempt on domestic flight foiled by passenger, but they didn't have my name yet. My phone had 47 missed calls. I scrolled through them without listening to a single voicemail. One was from Dara. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. She was crying before she said hello. You flew, Maya. Her voice broke on my name. You actually flew. Yeah, I said. I flew. She was crying for me because I couldn't cry yet. That's what best friends are for. We talked for 4 minutes. She asked if I was hurt. I said no. She knew I was lying. She told me she loved me. I said it back. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Hours passed. I don't remember what I did with them. I think I lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. I think I replayed the day, but not the parts you'd expect, not the fights, not the landing. I replayed the moment in row 14, my father's hand on my arm, his voice, "Let the men handle this." The grip, the words, the look in his eyes that said he wasn't trying to protect me, he was trying to prevent me. There's a difference. Protection comes from love. Prevention comes from doubt. And my father had been preventing me my entire life. Late that night, there was a knock on the door. Not a loud knock. 2 knuckle taps, military polite. I opened the door. My father was standing in the hallway. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, gas station cups, the kind with the plastic lids that never quite seal. He didn't ask to come in. He didn't push past me or launch into a speech. He just stood there, holding coffee, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face. It wasn't pride exactly, it wasn't shame. It was something closer to bewilderment, the look of a man who'd spent 35 years believing he understood the world and just found out he'd been wrong about the most important part of it. I took one of the coffees. We stood in the doorway in silence. The hallway hummed with the distant sound of ice machines and elevators. "I need to say something to you," he said finally. "But I need to say it right. Give me until tomorrow." I looked at him. He looked smaller than I remembered, standing in that hallway holding gas station coffee like a peace offering. I nodded. He turned and walked down the hallway. His footsteps were measured even. Military cadence, even in hotel loafers. I didn't close the door until he turned the corner. I went back inside. I sat on the bed, holding the coffee. It was lukewarm and tasted like it had been sitting on a burner for 3 hours. I drank it anyway. I didn't need him to tell me I was good enough. I'd just landed a hijacked plane with 3 unconscious operatives in the cabin and blood on the yoke. I knew what I was, but I wanted to hear what he finally saw. Not for validation, for closure, for the chance that after 29 years of silence and distance and careful, quiet dismissal, he might finally say the thing that would let us both stop pretending. I set the coffee on the nightstand. I looked at the door. It was still open, just slightly, the latch not quite caught. I left it that way. I woke up at 0500, 2 hours of sleep, maybe less. My body ached in ways I hadn't cataloged yet. Bruised ribs, swollen lip, the bandaged gash on my forearm, throbbing with my pulse. I laced up my running shoes and went out. DC in March is cold, the kind of cold that sits in your lungs and doesn't leave. I ran along the National Mall as the sun came up, past the reflecting pool, past the Washington Monument, past rows of bare trees and empty benches, and the long, flat silence of a city that hadn't woken up yet. My ribs protested every stride. I didn't care. Running was the only language my body understood when my mind was too full to speak. I stopped in front of the National Air and Space Museum. It wasn't open yet. The building sat in the gray morning light, massive and quiet. And I stood on the sidewalk with a split lip and bruised ribs and looked at it the way you look at a place that changed your life before you knew your life needed changing. I'd been here once. I was 7. My mother had been dead for a year. My father brought me on a Saturday, one of the only non-duty things he ever did with me that I can remember. We walked through the exhibits, and he pointed at an F-15 on display and said, "That's what I fly." I looked up at him and said, "Me too someday." He laughed. I wasn't joking. I was never joking. I stood in front of that museum at 0600 with a split lip and bruised ribs, and I could hear my 7-year-old voice saying those 3 words like they were being broadcast from inside the building. Me too someday. I'd said it with the absolute certainty that only children have. The certainty that comes before the world teaches you to doubt yourself. I ran back to the hotel. I showered. I dressed, jeans, a clean shirt, the leather jacket with the scuffed elbows. I went down to the lobby and sat in a chair facing the entrance. It was 0745. My father walked in at exactly 0800. Because of course he did. Pressed shirt, clean shave. 35 years of military punctuality embedded so deep it was involuntary. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, and his hands, the same hands that had gripped my arm on the plane, the same hands that had held a flag at my mother's funeral, were clasped in front of him like a man standing before a review board. He sat down across from me. He didn't order coffee. He didn't make small talk about the weather or the hotel or the news coverage or anything else that would have let us both avoid what was coming. "Will you take a walk with me?" he said. "Where?" "Somewhere I should have taken you a long time ago." We walked in silence for several blocks. DC was cold and starting to move. Commuters, joggers, government employees with badges clipped to their belts. My hands were in my jacket pockets. My father walked beside me. Not ahead, not behind, beside. It was the first time I could remember him walking next to me instead of in front. 29 years of following his stride, and now he was matching mine. I don't think he knew he was doing it. I noticed. We passed military memorials. We passed the Capitol. And somewhere around the third block, he started talking. Not about the hijacking, not about yesterday. About my mother. "Your mother said you'd be just like me," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but his hands were shaking, not the subtle tremor I'd seen in the hotel hallway, but a visible shake that he couldn't hide because they weren't holding coffee or gripping an armrest. I didn't want that. Not because I didn't think you could do it. Because I knew what it costs. He'd never talked about my mother and me in the same sentence, not once in 29 years. And now he was doing it on a sidewalk in DC, with his hands shaking worse than mine. We arrived at the museum. He stopped at the entrance. He looked at me. "I brought you here when you were 7, he said. "You told me you were going to fly." I laughed. He paused. The shaking in his hands spread to his jaw. I shouldn't have laughed. We walked inside. The museum was quiet, early morning, almost empty. Our footsteps echoed on the polished floor. And there it was, the F-15 on display. The same one, the same exhibit, reorganized but recognizable. The same plane I'd stood under as a 7-year-old girl who didn't know yet that her father would spend the next 22 years trying to keep her on the ground. We stood side by side in front of it. Neither of us spoke. The museum hummed with the quiet of a cathedral. My father took a breath. I could feel it, the weight of whatever he was about to say, pressing against the silence like a change in cabin pressure. The audience held its breath. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the F-15. His hands were clasped behind his back, parade rest, even now, even here. 35 years of muscle memory that no amount of retirement could undo. The museum was empty around us. Morning light came through the high windows and caught the dust in the air and made everything look suspended, frozen, like the whole building was holding its breath. He started talking, slowly. The way he briefed, measured, deliberate, every word chosen before it left his mouth. "When you were born," he said, "your mother held you and said, 'She's going to be just like you.' And I looked at you, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, couldn't even open your eyes yet, and I was terrified. Not of you, of what being like me would mean for you. The deployments, the distance, the things you carry home that don't fit in a duffel bag. I didn't want that for you. Not the flying, the cost of it." He paused, swallowed. His jaw worked the way it did when he was fighting something he didn't want to show. "So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I tried to make you not want it. I was cold, I was dismissive. I told you flying was a man's job because I thought if you believed that, you'd choose something safer, something that wouldn't put you in a cockpit over a country where people wanted to kill you." He exhaled. "It didn't work. Nothing I did worked. You were too much like me, and too much like her." I stood very still. I didn't trust my voice. "When you earned your wings," he said, "I was proud. I didn't say it. When you made captain, I was proud. I didn't say it. When you deployed, I lay awake every night until I got a text from you that said you were still alive. I never told you that. I thought if I said any of it, if I said I was proud or scared or that I stayed up until 0300 checking my phone, it would make you soft. And soft gets you killed." He turned his head slightly. Not all the way. Just enough that I could see his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the gray at his temples, the slight tremor in his chin. "What I said to you after Syria was the worst thing I've ever said to anyone. And I've said a lot of terrible things to a lot of people over 35 years. I told you that you didn't belong in that seat because I was afraid of what that seat had done to you. And instead of helping you carry it, I made it heavier. I made it so heavy, you put it down and walked away. And that is on me." He turned and looked at me. Full on. No sideways glance, no careful profile. His eyes were wet. Not crying, Tom Molson still didn't cry, but wet in a way that broke something in my chest that I'd been holding together with wire and stubbornness for a very long time. "You always were the better pilot." 6 words. That's all it was. He didn't apologize for 29 years of silence. He didn't try to explain away the retirement dinner, or the phone call from Al Udaid, or the hand on my arm at row 14. He just said the one thing I'd spent my whole life waiting to hear. And he meant it. I could tell because his voice cracked on always. He never cracks. I nodded. I didn't cry either. We're Molsons. We don't do that. But something that had been locked in my chest since I was 6 years old, since the funeral, since the flag, since the first time I looked at an F-15 and said, "Me too someday," finally loosened. Not broke, not shattered. Loosened. Like a bolt that had been torqued past spec for 23 years, and finally, quietly, gave a quarter turn. We stood there for another minute. Maybe 2. Neither of us said anything else. There was nothing else to say. The F-15 hung above us, suspended from the ceiling by cables and history, and for the first time in my life, I looked at that plane and didn't see my father. I saw me. We walked out together. The flight home was 3 days later. Commercial, window seat, alone. My father had stayed in D.C. for the gala, they gave him his award, and for the first time I didn't resent it. I sat in seat 12A and watched the clouds slide past and thought about the last 72 hours. I'd fought 3 armed operatives with a fire extinguisher, a shoulder harness, and a defibrillator. I'd landed a hijacked plane on an unfamiliar runway with shaking hands and blood on the yoke. I'd walked past my father twice in one day. Once as a daughter he dismissed, once as a woman he couldn't deny. And the bravest thing I did on that plane was stand up when my father told me to sit down. I smiled at that. It was the first real smile in a long time. The flight attendant asked if I wanted something to drink. I said water, she said. "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And I meant it. 2 weeks later, I drove to Centennial Airport south of Denver. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for 5 minutes, looking at the hangars and the windsock and the small white Cessnas tied down on the ramp. I thought about turning around. I didn't. I walked into the flight school. James Watanabe, 58, retired airline captain, the instructor who'd given me a few lessons before the world came apart, looked up from his desk. He'd seen the news. He knew who I was now. Everyone did. He didn't make a big deal of it. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said one word. "Same Cessna?" "Same Cessna." He didn't ask about the hijacking. He didn't ask about the news coverage or the FBI or the congressman or any of it. He just handed me the keys like he'd been saving my parking spot. That's the thing about good instructors, they always knew you'd come back. I flew. Cessna 172, single engine, 4 seats, 180 horsepower, nothing like an F-16, nothing like a 737. Just a small white airplane and the Colorado sky and the Rockies stretching out below me like the spine of the world. My hands didn't shake. A week after that, I got a phone call. Sandra Voss. She'd been my commanding officer at Al Udaid, lieutenant colonel then, 05. She was a colonel now, 06. She'd seen the news. "I'm not calling because of what happened on that flight," she said. Her voice was the same, direct, no nonsense, the kind of voice that made you stand straighter, even through a phone speaker. "I'm calling because you're the best pilot I ever commanded, and the Air Force could use you back. Not combat, training command, teaching the next generation." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, "Let me think about it." She said, "Take your time. The sky's not going anywhere." I hung up. I looked out the window at the Rockies, 14,000 feet of granite and snow catching the late afternoon sun. I wasn't sure what came next. For the first time in 3 years, that didn't scare me. 3 days later, I was airborne again. Cessna 172, alone. Golden hour over the Colorado Rockies. The mountains were lit amber and copper, and the air was smooth, and the engine hummed the steady, constant hum that small planes make when everything is working and nothing is wrong. I wasn't thinking about my father. I wasn't thinking about Syria. I wasn't thinking about Victor Lenko or Darren Cole or Nina Sorrell or the sound a defibrillator makes when it discharges against a human neck. I wasn't thinking about the cabin full of people who reached for me as I walked past, or the FBI agent who called me Captain Molson, like the rank still belonged to me, or the look on my father's face when he said the word, always, and his voice broke. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just flying. I keyed the radio out of habit, then let go. There was no one I needed to talk to. There was nowhere I needed to be. I was just here, 8,000 feet above the Rockies, alone, in a machine that weighed less than my father's expectations and flew better without them. I spent my whole life flying for someone else, for my father's approval, for the mission, for the uniform, for the people behind me on that plane. And somewhere over the Rockies, at 8,000 feet, with nobody watching and nobody keeping score, I finally flew for me. If someone ever told you to stay in your seat, stand up. The cabin is always watching. And you already know what you're capable of. You just have to be the first one to believe it. And if you made it this far, I appreciate you. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have stayed in your seat or stood up anyway? And have you ever had someone finally see your worth after doubting you?